CNBC is on assignment in Barcelona as Spain once again plays host to the Mobile World Congress, where the world's top telecom and technology companies have gathered to show off their latest wares, whilst weighing in on the future for artificial intelligence, 5G, competitiveness, and a fractured world. I'm Karen Cho, and over the next 30 minutes we'll bring you highlights from our coverage featuring all the big interviews you might have missed. Europe's C-suite has grown increasingly vocal since the inauguration of President Trump, calling for the bloc's regulators to cut red tape and ease the regulatory burden as they try and keep up with global peers. We spoke to a slew of corporate leaders here in Barcelona as they look to stay in the game. The Digital Services Act is effectively about preventing illegal, harmful activities online, stopping disinformation. What is wrong with that principle?
Yeah, in theory, if it was limited to that, it would be pretty good. But the reality is there's a lot of mission creep from there, and it authorizes the government to put flaggers inside of different companies. The speech that it ends up regulating goes beyond the type of sort of conduct that we would all agree on, pedophilia, terrorist speech. And it moves beyond that, and that's what's concerning, because it ends up being a race to the bottom. With technology, it's difficult to stop that type of regulation at the borders, and so I think it's bad for Europe as a general matter to have AI that's not based on a full diversity of viewpoint, but it's not acceptable to the United States if it ends up having extraterritorial application. There's another layer of concern for us, which is protectionism. To the extent that these regulations are really directed at U.S. companies and U.S. companies alone, and there's exceptions for companies based in Europe, that's not going to be acceptable. Because again, the U.S. wants to lead in AI. We don't want to have to go about that alone. We're happy to partner with countries, and those that align with the U.S. for a free and open AI are going to deliver the benefits for their people as well.
European lawmakers are worried about misinformation from Chinese and Russian bots. How do you stop that threat without changing the legislation?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of steps you can do that would empower individual users to take steps to block or to mute or to not follow that type of conduct. But the problem is when the government starts to dictate and micromanage what can be said on the internet, you end up sweeping in a lot of content that is really just sort of poor political speech, religious speech, dissenting views on the scientific front. And in particular, when it comes to AI models, I think there is a concern in Europe that some of their companies are starting to fall behind. And in part, they make it very difficult to obtain data to train AI. And AI data is like a textbook for a student. If you have a book where every other page is ripped out, it's not going to be as good as a result. So we are really at a fork in the road right now. China is developing its AI. DeepSeek is an example. It's a very censored version of AI. If you ask DeepSeek what happened at Tiananmen Square, it tells you it doesn't know. If you ask about Uyghur genocide, it doesn't give you answers. So it's really the time for Europe and the US and Western allies to align on a free speech version of AI, and that's what the US is committed to.
We have all this kind of wildfires everywhere. There is the need for data centers. There is the need for more computation power. There is this need for AI. There is the need for connecting the world, to bring businesses together. There is the need for consumers to have faster access. And for all of this, we are kind of firefighters trying to solve that problems, but we have a leaking hose here in Europe because the regulatory environment is not fitting. First, what we need is water supply. This is our spectrum. We need urgently more spectrum in Europe. The second thing is, we need a digital single market. We need one market as 27, European economies and not 27 different markets. It cannot be that I have a drop call on the borders, in Europe because, there are local legal regulations. The third one is, before we distinguish the fire, what are we doing? We have regulation, we have a discussion about it, how we organize ourselves. We have to stop the red tape in Europe. There's so much bureaucracy on our industries. We should go to an ex post regulation than rather trying to anticipate everything in this system. We simply have to get fast. And by the way, just look into the US. In this market, things are doing much better and the ecosystem is prospering.
The European Commission has been talking about less prescriptive regulation, still having goals, but without the prescription, as well as Macron talking about raising almost $1 for euro versus Stargate. Are any of these positive tailwinds, or is Europe still going to miss out on the AI race at this point?
My worry is that we miss out on the AI race big time. To be honest, I was quite impressed about President Macron and his initiative in France. That was a great one. Bringing the community together, trying to build something here in Europe on ourselves as well. But the US is far ahead. They have the ecosystem of the big over-the-top players who are having the financial power to invest. They have the technology, OpenAI and all these developments are coming from the US. And on top of that, they have very cheap energy to deploy the big data centers. And now all the money, Stargate, is going into building up for billions, 500 billion on Stargate, building the data center capacity. So this is not only an enabler for smart networks, for smart data use, it is the start of the reindustrialization of the US.
You've been one of the strongest industry critics on European regulation. It's a regulatory first approach. Is there any sense that this is changing and that Europe is getting its act together?
I would say if we want to be positive, and I think that's often the best way to attack a problem, we're actually starting to see that the European Commission and European politicians understand we have an issue. And that's the first step, is starting to address them. So I'm getting a bit more optimistic, but where I'm still concerned is we're moving without the speed necessary. And what's happening in the US under the Trump administration is a rather aggressive cutting of red tape, simplification, and that will put the US on a strong trajectory. And unless we match that in Europe, we're going to fall further behind. So I think Europe has to realize the issue, starting to be tick mark on that, but we also need to move with speed. And here we're,
President Macron in France is talking about trying to match the Stargate spending on AI infrastructure. Is that a positive development, that at least we close the gap on capital requirements in Europe?
Well, I think you need to think differently about this. I think we need to think, how do we make Europe investable again? You know, the returns on investments in Europe are too low. That's the heart of the problem. So we need to make capital is available globally, but it all requires return, and that's where the problem is. And that's why regulation is so bad. It lowers the return potential. So think about it as revenues minus cost in a simple way. Cost becomes higher in Europe, revenues the same, profitability lower. And that's the heart of the problem.
Coming up.
I think we will have competition globally, but I think it's really an imperative for the West to lead, because we want these models to represent freedom and self-expression.
Welcome back to highlights from CNBC's coverage of Mobile World Congress. The world of artificial intelligence has been turned on its head in 2025, with DeepSeek sending ripples through the market, a topic that was high on the agenda in Barcelona. It's funny as you talk about controls and protectionism, it's that very landscape in the United States that has allowed DeepSeek to flourish. This Chinese technology got going because of the lack of access to very expensive US chips that there are export controls on some of this key product out of the US. The Chinese tried to do it on the cheap as a result. And what is the threat of DeepSeek to big American tech players?
Well, look, there's certainly some concerns around DeepSeek. One is it looks pretty clear like they've distilled some data from OpenAI and other technologies. While they claim they did it on the cheap, they may have done it on the take instead. But the U.S. is going to have the full stack, from the chip systems to the data centers to all of the scientists that we need to work on these technologies. So we're going to make sure the U.S. leads the way. But I think a lot of DeepSeek technology has been developed, and they aren't being entirely truthful about either the funding or the sources of data that they've been using.
As we talk about innovation in 2025, there's a lot of geopolitics, and it may have struck you too about the big presence of the Chinese here at Mobile World Congress on the back of DeepSeek and this breakthrough technology, and whether or not they used OpenAI to train their models. How do you see the threat of DeepSeek?
Broadly, I think AI is such a compelling technology. Every country in the world is going to pursue it. I think it's an imperative that the Western world lead in innovating in this new technology. That means investing in compute so we have the best infrastructure. It means investing in data so that the models can be trained in innovative ways. And it means that having the best research labs like OpenAI that are always on the frontier of new techniques to make these AI models effective. I think we will have competition globally, but I think it's really an imperative for the West to lead because we want these models to represent freedom and self-expression. And I'm really proud to be affiliated with, I think, one of the West's great research labs.
As you talk about American companies, Western companies leading, the dialogue from the White House recently around trade tariffs has the Europeans questioning whether they want to have as much reliance on US tech. They want to grow homegrown European technology. Does that pose an issue when you're talking about the likes of OpenAI leading in this infrastructure, in this world of AI, when Europe wants its own challenges now too because of the geopolitics?
You know, it's a very complicated geopolitical landscape, but we were saying off camera, I'm actually here because my startup's here is opening our first international office in London, in Soho. And I've spent the past week talking to European companies about deploying AI agents. And it's remarkable how similar the problems companies are facing in Europe as in the United States. For a startup like ours, we're seeing similar levels of demand. We haven't seen reticence because we're based in the US. In fact, we've seen a lot of excitement that we're opening up an office here. So I do think the geopolitical landscape has become more complex, but I'm really optimistic that there's a lot of shared interest in Western companies pursuing this.
Has DeepSeek made a difference to your world at this stage? Because it's taken a lot of industries by storm. The fact we've got cheaper AI coming to the market, you don't need very deep pockets to be able to build out AI. Has that added some fresh momentum, do you think, to the industry?
I think it has created a different thinking. The momentum's still there. Large language model continue to be prevalent. We continue to see huge demand for training the infrastructure at scale, but obviously DeepSeek brought a different thinking about how we train these models. And the reality is that you can have smaller models with better data and provide a better outcome. So I think as we think going forward what the deployment of AI will look like, I think it's a combination of multiple models, what I call the mix of experts, that allows us to provide an agentic approach to workflows in the enterprise so they can accelerate the deployment of AI.
DeepSeek showed us the improvement in model, but in general, the demand for training, the demand for inferencing, even now, the demand for reasoning is surging. So regardless of model development, I think we need a lot of infrastructure, so the AI data center infrastructure will be, growing fast.
It's very hard to have a conversation about AI without talking about NVIDIA as well. And I know part of your new strategy is around the GPU as a service as well. As you're pushing into that business, there's a lot of debate about the performance of NVIDIA versus perhaps some competitors. In your view, is NVIDIA still the best around for the solutions it's offering?
Definitely. NVIDIA is the best, provider of GPU up to now. But, there are some trend that, one is the big techs, such as Google, Amazon. Those guys want to build their own chipset because they think NVIDIA GPU is so, expensive, right? So, they want to build much cheaper solutions. The other thing is, kind of NPU, right? NPU is more fit for the inferencing. So, the training versus inferencing, the inferencing demand goes up, right? So NPU is more fit for the inference.
Have you dabbled with DeepSeek yet?
We are working with DeepSeek. We are working with all models. We are testing them, comparing them. And actually we realize that depending on the use case you have, some models are better than others. And so we will have to get used to that world where it's not going to be one size fits all. It's going to be really depending on what type of use case. Always thinking frugal AI. So you don't want to spend a lot of money with large models if you are not looking for something that's very complex to solve. So it's going to be really, fine-tuning the use of all those models. And the innovation keeps going because, DeepSeek is one example, but this open source approach, which we really like in our industry, is going to keep on bringing new innovation. The barrier to entry is lower.
I think a lot of people are talking about agentic AI and also an appless world as well. These are obviously interesting concepts, and the idea sounds great. The idea that we have this very powerful digital assistant that is able to kind of almost know what we want to do and help us out on some of these everyday tasks. How far away are we from that vision? Is that a vision Samsung wants to drive towards?
Absolutely, with S25. I don't like that much this kind of industry buzzword things. That's why I like to kind of put that in context of real people, normal people in the street and customers. What that means literally is we have added intelligence at multiple touch points of our user interface. Like in the keyboard, you can translate, you can on the screen, you can circle to search and so on and so forth. But we are exposing those capabilities to agents, so like Bixby or Gemini. And what that do for you, I think that's what's most important. Simple things like I'm an Arsenal fan, I want to know when are the next 5 Arsenal games, have those in my calendar and get notification when Arsenal scores. So I just need to say that and it will happen. So what that means for the user doesn't need to know that we need to activate the search to go on the internet to search and I need to open the calendar app, which is a Samsung app to put those things. It just get the action done across app. Or for example, you and others are writing a lot of reviews on our products, which I watch actually, but there are many. But simply to say, well, watch these YouTube videos and summarize them and write me a note. And that note will be created directly into Samsung Notes. This is a remarkable action which is possible today. So basically what we mean by that is exposing capability to the user so things can get done simply without the users having to navigate through different apps. Now, the vision is, and the challenge will be, the vision is to extend that to multiple domains and across the whole ecosystem, which is a long journey.
What's your read-in on enterprise AI at this point? Because agentic AI is a big topic of discussion. A lot of people, I think, beyond those involved in technology don't know what that means, autonomous AI. Where are we at? How is enterprise needing to think about this revolution?
I think there's several use cases that are emerging. Some are horizontal, some are very industry specific. On the horizontal front, customer service is just being inundated with AI right now. We're doing it in ours, and that's where you see some of these early agentic use cases. So agentic is basically, the basic AI that we've seen so far. You can ask a question and you can get an answer. You can get a document written, you can get a summary written, you can get all those things. But when it can start to reason and then call other agents and then complete an actual task for you, then that's what you're trying to do. So the action of taking a basic trouble ticket from a customer, doing all the different things that need to be done to make sure it's good, and then closing that off with a customer would be a simple version of an agentic application. So we're seeing that. We're seeing robotics in manufacturing where we're using AI, seeing it in healthcare emerging. And I think every customer right now is really focused on what are the use cases that I should start with? And I think all of them want to get going with something, and most of them are at least trialing or doing something.
Coming up on the show.
No, I'm horrified. Not just merely worried. Will people suddenly ever come to their senses and realize what's happened? It's unbelievable.
Welcome back to CNBC on assignment at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where geopolitical issues were high on the agenda for many of our on-air guests. I want to just tackle the relationship between the US and Europe, because you've made some friendly remarks here, but the reality is the White House has taken issue with some of the fines and taxes lobbed on big US technology. And the latest that is under investigation is Google and its practices of favoring its own vertical search. What is wrong with Europe tackling what it sees as monopolistic behavior?
Yeah. In the US, we are very concerned as well about competition and making sure that there's a level playing field. The issue when it comes to European regulation is to make sure that it's being driven by those considerations and not by a protectionist agenda. Because if a company is being attacked by Europe simply because it originated or is based in America, that's not something that we're going to be interested in accepting. And so you'll see us speaking up. But to your point, there's a tremendous opportunity to work together. We're going to lead the world when it comes to AI and next generation technologies. We don't have to do it alone. We can do it in a way that will benefit Europe as well. I think we're all better off if we do that.
Last year we spoke, the geopolitical environment and business environment was very different. We had a president in the US who was looking to work with what it saw as allied countries on technology, including Korea and countries in Europe. There is now a new president in the US who seems to also be clashing with some of those partners now on the technology front and the geopolitical front. How are you thinking about the business environment at the moment as the geopolitics has changed, particularly as very key technologies like AI, like semiconductors are dragged in to some of the geopolitics? In South Korea, when it comes to some of these critical technologies, is it about building a homegrown supply chain, a more secure supply chain? What are your thoughts?
I don't see many changes because Korea is a very, good relationship with America, especially in, semiconductor and AI. We are a big ally with them. So, there's no ban to export to Korea, right? And then we had a lots of investment in America, even, some factories. So, not so much difference. But, I don't know. But, we don't see much difference yet.
Okay, so and you don't feel there's more risk doing business these days in the tech world?
There can be some risks, but, up to now, we don't see much.
All businesses now, Cristiano, looking at the state of geopolitics in the world with the new administration in the US and, of course, the global trade situation. We've heard a number of tariffs on Mexico, on Canada, on China as well. Do you see any potential impact from these tariffs on your business?
Look, we've been in this technology business for a while. I think, just looking at MWC, we've been here since 1987. And when I look at the macro level, technology, and especially mobile technology and all those other industry participating, it's a global marketplace. And the things that we're really excited about it, more than what's happening short term with trade, is really the macro trends that we see in the industry. We are at the beginning of a significant upgrade for AI smartphones. We're seeing PCs changing to AI PCs. Cars are becoming computer. That's what's driving our business, not necessarily what we're going to see in the short term.
But just in terms of the short term, navigating these headwinds, are you expecting any impact from these tariffs?
It's hard to tell because you don't know exactly how this is going to go. The interesting thing is we're a big exporter of chips. We're not an importer of chips. We export chips. Their chips are going to devices that are made all over the world. And it's hard to really know what is happening. We're just going to navigate based on whatever the outcome is.
The US has just unleashed tariffs. Canada, Mexico, China, threats that Europe is next. Is any of this going to catch up with our own?
Well, our industry, I think any business would be exposed to tariff. And I think especially in Europe, Europe relies on the global economy. I don't think tariff is good in the end for any business. We're not as exposed maybe than other industries, so we would be more in the, after wave. But of course, that's something we follow carefully because we want to work in an open world where there's no limit to what we can do with any parts of the world.
Are you worried then about the direction that the US is going at the moment?
No, I'm horrified. Not just merely worried. It's, will people suddenly ever come to their senses and realize what's happened? It's unbelievable. I read a letter this morning that Lech Walesa wrote, and I have met him and honored him for what he stood for. And he wrote about how, horrible this is that the U.S. had stood for the freedom and he watched when the Soviet Union collapsed and Reagan was involved, and his letter was so incredibly on target, and I kind of cried. There are good people in the world, a lot more in Europe. The United States is in a sad shape because in the United States you can have 50% of the people on one side and 50% on the other, and that's about what it is. More people voted against Trump than voted for him, by the way, for different candidates. And that means that if you have a difference of views, you negotiate and compromise in the middle. And that's not happening. We're going to the extreme right, and we're going absolutism.
That's all from CNBC on assignment at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. For more articles and videos, you can scan the QR code on the screen now. Thanks for watching.